Good morning, everyone. I'm Björn Westling. It's my pleasure to introduce the next keynote speaker, Yvonne Eriksson. We are very happy that you have taken the role as the conference moderator, but we are equally happy that you have accepted to deliver a keynote address. Yvonne Eriksson is a professor in information design at Mälardalen University in Eskilstuna, which is near Stockholm. She's been involved in tactile images for about 25 years, in research and in development of design and production of tactile images. Her dissertation from 1998 has the title Tactile Pictures, Pictorial Presentations for the Blind, set from 1784 to 1940. And she has been a member of the Swedish Braille Authority for many years and is now a member of the MTM Scientific Council. So please feel very welcome, Yvonne.
Thank you very much. As Björn mentioned, I have been involved with tactile pictures and tactile reading for many years, not so much in Braille, but mostly in tactile pictures. But I also have a background in visual studies and art history. And the last 10 years I have been involved in, of course, in information design, since I'm a professor in information design, but very much in design and design thinking, both for information but also for how to use visuals in an industrial context for both factory planning but also for product development. And now I think I have come to a point where I can see that I have advantages from coming to have a split background, so to say, both working with the tactile and with the visual. Because there will be a need in the future, I think, even for sighted people to pay more attention to touch and the benefit you can get from the material itself. And a term that is very common these days is the embodiment. And I think it's because you have a kind of a distance when you come to digital media. So I'm very glad that I can share my thoughts and thinking about to combine design in a broader sense with the future of tactile pictures and tactile reading, and also user involvement. And my presentation is titled Human-Centered Design and the Meaning of User Involvement. In design thinking, if you take a design thinking perspective, you put the user in the center. And you start together with the user to framing the problem. But the problem is not always what you think it is. It could easily be something else. I have an example I heard from colleagues in India who have heard it from colleagues in Japan. So it's a lot of hearing. We don't know if it's true or not. But people was very irritated because the elevator was too slow. And then they speed up the elevator and people feel very uncomfortable because it went too fast. And then they realized what was the problem. It was the waiting time. So they put up a video so people could look at something. And then the speed of the elevator was the same as originally, and everyone was happy. So the problem was not the speed of the elevator. The problem was the waiting time because they were bored. So I think this is something you can learn from to think of what is the problem. So you start with the problem or the ideas you have, and you're reframing the problem and the ideas, and identify as many options and ideas for solutions as possible. And then you have to refining the solution and then back again to reframing the problem. So this is a kind of a circular process where you see how you can work. And my thing is, how can you put the child as a user, and what will it mean? So for human-centered design, it's very important, or it's always required, to have the user involvement. But to define a user is a complex if one wants to avoid stereotypical categorizations. And it does exist ISO standards for user and for usability. But who is the user? Is it a child with blindness? Is it a child that likes horses but happens to be blind? Is it the people with blindness of all ages? Or is it children living in special areas with mixed functionalities? We are very, very eager, so to say, to categorize and to map. And mapping and categorizations have been a powerful and influential tool for the organization of knowledge, thinking, planning, and conducting research. And to understand the impact of categorization, one has to adapt a historical perspective. In the 16th century, while the need to understand the environment grew and the science with it, categorization and mapping became tools to organize and define important historical phenomena as well as species and objects vital for science and technology. But what do we miss when we categorize in order to map up something? And for what purpose are we defining a specific group of users? I would tell you who can see my slides, when I'm only talking and reading, it's only text. So there is no special on it. But now I show a picture. It's a sculpture, group of sculptures, and we have one row with boys and one row with girls, and they look the same and they are dressed in the same way. Just blue jacket. It's a school uniform. So users are not uniform, no matter of category. And of course, designers and design researchers need to narrow down the group of users. When doing so, they often categorize the user from age, sex, or special needs. And if we go to age, which is very common, and we talk about elderly people, it does not exist any definition of what is an elderly person. And it's also the same with children. Where do you stop to be a child, and when are you a young adult, and when are you an elderly child, etc. However, when we learn about the groups, we do it from research made in other areas, such as cognitive science, or cognitive psychology, or behavioral psychology, where average living conditions and needs are defined. The definition with this kind of research are different from these in a design situation. Since the description of different group is widely flowering, when the groups themselves adapt the understanding of the needs or limitations, it is part of their internalization of the external expectations. And I have met children with blindness who have told me, they are about 5 years old, I can't do this because I'm blind. And they cannot, I don't think that a 5-year-old child really have the awareness what they can do or not do because of the blindness. They are probably told. Maybe I'm wrong. We're coming back to that discussion later. But research indicate how to ask a user. Since the research indicates that people are not aware of why they make decisions, and especially not when they are put into a situation where they are asked to make a choice. And a very, very interesting research showing that when people have been asked to choose a girl they wanted to date, and they change the picture, and they don't recognize that, they still talk about the girl they think they have had chosen. So it's you don't really know. And also that in the testing situation, people would like to please the researcher or the opposite. And it's also very common that they made themselves the spokesman for other people, telling, oh, I don't need this, but I think that my colleagues and friends need that. There is also a relation between the environment and individuals. And from a phenomenological perspective, we perceive and orient ourselves in the environment by using our body. In that sense, the condition of the body affects how we understand the environment. That means people with blindness, children and adults, experience the environment differently from how sighted perceive and interact with the environment. What we perceive and how depends on an interaction between psychological conditions, previous knowledge, culture, and context. We have done research on tactile perceptions for many years now, I would say hundreds of years. You find the first examples already in the 17th century. But I have found very few examples with focus on the experience of tactile pictures. What you find is braille reading, shape recognition, recognition of symbols, spatial understanding, interpretation of tactile pictures, interpretations of texture. And here I have taken a photo from MTAIM's website, seeing a child reading a tactile picture. The user involvement, especially children's involvement, is often focused on control of their capacity. And I mentioned yesterday in my introduction that in the late 19th century and early 20th century, very much focus was on to control the children's understanding and to avoid that they should spend too much time with fantasies about the surrounding, which I perfectly well understand. And when we put users in the involvement in research, and as I said, especially children's involvement is often focused on control of their capacity. One way is to ask them to draw. Another to ask them to identify single details. And I think you never do this when you come to sighted people. If I ask you to draw or paint a picture, most of your result will not reach the level of a professional illustrator or artist's picture. But this will not disqualify you to read and interpret pictures, since among sighted we do not compare skills in drawing or paintings with the understanding of the same. But when it comes to people that are blind, we find a long history of that kind of comparisons. If we look at the conventions for design of tactile pictures, where I'm a part of. The conditions for tactile reading in relation to human-centered design needs to be discussed, and how dominant design routes can hinder innovation. We talk very much about learning. Here I have some pictures made by Peter Johansson, which is also from the website of MTA, and it's a kind of a learning material for how to teach and interact with tactile pictures with children. And you can see here, which is very typical, we learn the child to find the outline of a glass, and then we compare it with the pictures, and you can also see that we have an adult learning a child how to look at the spoon and to compare it to tactile pictures of a spoon. I will continue to discuss more design of tactile pictures and picture books. We are often focused on the conditions for tactile perception while we are designing tactile pictures, which is fine, and it's also necessary. You also find examples of the opposite. But we need to problematize the meaning of the picture and what kind of experience it can immediate. A picture, what is a picture? It's something that we understand intuitively, but could be hard to give a simple answer to, especially if you wanted to explain for a person who never have had eyesight what is a picture. But it could be defined as a two-dimensional surface on which an object, landscape, individual, or group of people are represented, or depicted, you can also say. But it could be a painting, drawing, photography, or a tactile pictures as well. But pictures belong to our visual culture. And I have argued that the tactile pictures belong to the visual culture as well. Pictures, they can explain things, but they can also puzzle us, scare us, make us feel happy, and much more. The scholar in visual studies and art history, Hans Belting, argues that interaction between our bodies and external images include a third parameter, namely the medium which hosts the image. The medium, which could be a tactile pictures, is a kind of an artificial body that images need in order to become visible. The picture comes alive by us. We make them alive when we look at them, when we touch them, when we talk about them. And, Belting argues, our bodies themselves function as a living media. Image colonize our bodies and our brains. Image happen within our bodies. The body is a site where images take place. The human being itself is the natural locus of an image. Picture comes to life when we touch and explore a tactile picture or a sculpture, for instance. I will go back, as you can see, I'm very fond of history. I will go back to the history of tactile pictures. In the Swedish magazine Sympathies from 1917, the signature KL wrote, "Because of the incapability of blind people to perceive and experience pleasure of fine art, some friends of blind has sought for a help to overcome the lust. One of them are C. Piaget, that made relief of the painting Angelus, made by Millet in late 19th century. And now I describe the painting. The painting shows a man and a woman standing and praying at the field in the sunset. And according to the author of the article, the relief painting had causes a discussion among blind people in regard to value of relief, of the tactile picture. Some people thought the experience was useless, while other people said that the relief gave them a rich experience. The author ended the article by mentioning that if a blind person does not enjoy the experience of the relief, they should not feel sorry, since many sighted do not find pleasure in fine art either. And I will continue with another example, and this is a picture showing the head of a young Nero, and it's a sculpture. And it was about 30 years later when the scholar in psychology, his name is, I don't know his first name, but his name is Revesh, and F is the initial. And he wrote a book, Psychology and Art of the Blind, where he explored and discussed what's happened when blind people themselves make art, and also how can they understand from touch. And in one chapter, the aesthetic experience in haptics, he described when he met with a man who explored this head of Nero and eye of the young Nero, and I quote, "Ears, a face, eyes closed, nose, mouth closed. The recognition of the separate parts of the face gave him pleasure." He then went on, "Old face, full of wrinkles. It must be an old man." Because he had interpreted strands of the hair extending over the forehead as wrinkles. Revesh asked how the old original might have been. He answered, "Judging from the wrinkles on the forehead, I should say that he is about 60 years old. He looks rather like a man who once worked with me in the Institute for the Blind." Revesh asked whether he found the face beautiful or ugly, and he said, "Not beautiful, for the form is too rough and the face is not oval." When Revesh had explained to him that the bust represented a child of about 6-7 years, he suddenly found the face beautiful, as the round face might well fit a child, but not a grown-up man. And he added, the man, "I am thinking of a laughing child, with his mouth somewhat open, just as a boy should be." The aim of the two historical examples was to bring up central issues from the discussion about what and how people with blindness, adults and children, can get from reading tactile pictures. It has been a strive to find solution of what can be represented in the tactile pictures and how it should be interpreted, but also discussion about the pleasure of tactile perception. As cited, we rarely formulate what we see in the pictures. We start immediately to associate, or we look at each other and then we are just, yeah, I see, I understand. But if I ask you to describe even this, it looks simple in a way, picture in front of you. If I ask you to verbalize what you see, experience, and how it affects you emotionally, and in addition, motivate your feelings, I think that most of you will be quiet for a while and don't find it so easy. So if we look at this picture, where to start? You can either focus on the boy that covers half of the picture and the airplane he's playing with, or the small figures in the front that looks like stuff at an airport. So the aim to showing these pictures is also to start to think of what are we asking for when we ask a child to interpret details, tell what they think and what they feel when they're talking about the tactile pictures. It's not so easy to find the right words for what you are seeing. There's always a level which is emotional that you don't really know how to express and explain. So, but we don't ask so often, we don't ask children that often what they feel about the pictures. Or, yes. So what I was thinking of is that to be diseased or to be disabled or to be able. Disease or functional limitations make people disabled to take part in society or have access to various environments, media, or events. But one can still be able to read, write, move around in environments and participate in events. To be incapable to use the eyes, the sight, is not the same as being incapable to have an opinion about visual culture, books, and pictures. A concept that J.J. Gibson came up with in 1979 is the affordance of an object, and it can be defined as all action possibles latent in an object. Like a chair, when you see a chair, it gives you the options to sit down. Later in 1988, Donald Norman took up these ideas in relation to design of objects, and he emphasized social as well as material aspects in the affordance of an object. In the slide we see, which I'm showing here, we see a child that explored two kinds of plates, a deep plate and a flat plate. The child then looked at tactile pictures representing the plates. But the context will affect how the child will interpret the tactile pictures of the round shape. The pictures in this context, where the child do have the plates and then have the tactile pictures, is very likely that they interpret the round shape as a plate. But the context affects how the tactile pictures is interpreted. Because the picture itself does not offer any specific meaning for roundness. The picture does not communicate plate. The tactile picture could in another context be interpreted as a ball. However, it is not possible to neglect the body in relation to tactile perception. The reader is using the hands and moving them while exploring the tactile pictures. Embodiment usually refers to how the body and its interactive processes. Within the context of multimodality, the emphasis is on the relation between physical experience and multimodal resources, media practices, and social spaces. This relation is an independent one where meaning making is grounded in physical experience through bodily forms, gestures, gaze, body posture, facial expressions, movement, which shapes the kind of interaction with the environment. But when we make tactile pictures that we wanted to share with children with blindness, we often goes back to the process school oriented, when we take the perspective of a sender. And the tactile picture is given the reader who is expected to interpret is given to the reader who is expected to interpret the details and the content in an intended way. The message is transferred to the reader, so we don't see the complexity. While when we are looking at pictures for sighted people, we see it often as a communication, creation and exchange of meaning. And I want to remind you that communicate comes from communicare, which means to share. So it's something that you share. So you have a producer or a reader, and you have the referent, which is the object or the thought. It creates a meaning, and the meaning also is a relation between the picture itself and the interpreter. And if you come into the context of communication, you often come into the semiotic theories. And semiotics, in visuals, we look at semiotics as icon, index, and symbol. An icon means that the picture looks alike. You can see a horse looks like a real horse. And an index is more indicate. You say, no, there is no fire without smoke, and you can talk about footprints. Someone has to been walking there. Now we use footprints as a metaphor as well. And symbols is conventions. In the map we have symbols which we have decided. We all agree on that it's a blue spot is a lake, for instance. And in tactile pictures, we have a dominance of the process school-oriented ideas. We show real objects from the environment, and with high iconicity, they look alike, and it should be possible to compare the object with the picture of an object with a real object, and you should find it in your neighborhood, so to say. And we do have a dominance of teaching material, but how to stimulate the pleasure and reading for fun? When we come to sighted children, they often learn how to look and what to look for, of course, in the same way as we have to learn blind children how to look and how to explore a picture, but it's often very much in a playful way. And I'm sorry for the quality here, but it's of the pictures, but I will tell you. It's taken from a book, Places by Philip Yanawin, and he was a curator and educator at Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's a book opening, and on the left-hand side you see a picture in black and white, and it's a woman looking out of the window, and you can't see what's outside the window. And the question is asked to the reader, what do you think this woman sees outside her window? And on the next page, they come up with some suggestions. Might she see a place like this? And then we have a painting showing a petrol station. Or this, why do you think so? And then we have another painting showing a corner with a bar, and you have a group of people lining up outside the bar. So here there will be no right or wrong answer. It will be a more kind of discussion. What are you seeing in the picture, and how can you interpret it? Another book from another example from the same author. It's about lines, and we have a book opening, and it's a light evening. It's a painting showing a late evening, a sky full of stars and a moon, and it's shining, and it's made of lines. And this painting is made up of tiny lines of color, the text says. Lines make all sorts of shape. Find this, and then we find these three examples. One is lines shaping a kind of a globe or a round shape. Another drawing is shaping a church, and the third is a kind of flames or vegetarians or something like that. And the text continue. They tell a story about a very bright and starry night in the small village. Can you tell the rest of the story? So it's more to interact with the children. And the last example, it's coming from an opening with shapes, and it starts with a text. Some artists paint shapes of things they see. Name the things you see here. How many groups of 3 can you find? Can you find any hidden shapes? And you can see 3 puppies drinking water, and you see 3 glasses and 3 pigeons, and then you see some other fruits in the front of the painting. In order to challenge tradition and pre-understanding, it is necessary to investigate what conceptions dominate when it comes to how tactile materials should be designed among those who give the assignment, the designers of tactile materials, and the users. So what is the meaning of user involvement? It means you have to interact with the user, observe the user, talk with the user, elaborate with the user, support the user's interaction with each other. And what can we learn from tactile readers? If I had the answer, I would not have anything to learn. But what I like to challenge is tactile pictures as only a control of understanding among the user, an understanding built on theories from process-oriented school. And the second I want to challenge is convention, stereotypical elements that are put together with hardly any variations. So to make the invisible visible, I think we can do this by opening up for a dialogue with the user, to learn more from those who have tactile experience, both children and adults. Conclusion: it does exist a lot of knowledge regarding tactile perception that we should not ignore. And it's very important, and it's a long tradition that goes back to Theodor Heller and David Katz that was mentioned yesterday, and we also have Gunnar Jansson here in Sweden. It does exist a long tradition of producing tactile pictures for children. The focus has very much been on recognition of picture elements. In order to further develop tactile picture books, we need to learn more about the experience of the user. What could a beholder share mean in a context of tactile experience of pictures or 3-dimensional objects? And by beholder share is a quotation from Ernest Gombrich, and he talked about that you can show something in a picture, but if it's almost the same and how to get picture came into life, you need also to give something back to the picture in order to experience something. We need to develop new methods for how to measure the quality of the tactile reading situation. And now I'm talking more about the design and the experience. Digitalization of reading material will give new opportunity and also create hinders for Braille reader in relation to visual material. If we have everything on a screen, it could be complicated in the future, but I think we need to be innovative to see how we can use the new technology and make tactile material more accessible. By involving the user and create dialogue with the user, I am convinced that we will overcome the obstacles and meet the challenge with new opportunities. Thank you. Kommer upp. Ja, tack.
Thank you, Yvonne. We have a few minutes for questions. Please. We have a question over there.
No? Now it's working. Now it's working. Okay, thank you, Charlotte Magnusson, Lund University. Very nice talk. One thing I would like to challenge you a little bit maybe is, at least this is one of the things I learned from the HIP project, how important actually the act of creation is for understanding. I mean, visual kids who have sight, they kind of draw and they learn to interpret images through drawing, in a sense, as well. And this process is often missing when you are talking about visually impaired kids, because it's sort of assumed that they are not able to draw and they're asked to interpret directly. So I guess this was more an observation, but I didn't see creation or own creation anywhere in your slides. So maybe you could comment on that?
Yes, I can. I think it's very, very important with own creation. And I think this morning when we heard about the origami, that you learn, you remember this more bodily member part. But what I'm more, I would say, I think it's important to create, but I don't think you should choose either do pictures yourself or reading pictures. You need both sides. And it's often that you don't recognize a blind child's drawing as good enough. And it have often been kind of a proof that they can't understand. Because you have to see, it's very complicated to learn to draw if you don't see how to behave. And Susanna Miller has shown in one of her research, you have a group of children, they're walking around in a big room, and in every corner there were toys. And then she asked them to draw. And what they did, they drew a straight line. But to represent the corners, they made a kind of a brown shape, they scribbling, and then they continue. And she figured out they didn't know that they could make a square by, what do you say? What I lost the words. To change direction of the hand, I wanted to describe. Yes, you see what I mean. To make, because you can't imitate in the same way if you don't have sight. So I think it's very important. But it's good you bring it up, because this is also kind of a user involvement that you should be a part of the process.
We have another question down here. Wait for the microphone.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for this great presentation. In Turkey, we are conducting a project which aims to teach children in 5 and 8 years of age between to teach how to understand a three-dimensional object in a drawing line in a two-dimensional surface, and vice versa. For example, an apple, a car, a cube, a glass, and other things. And also we try to teach them, when they see something in the surface, can they convert them into a three-dimensional interpretation like that. And could you have some recommendations to us how to start and what to begin for this project? Thank you.
Oh, it was not a small question. I think it depends on the group, and I think it's to be 8 or 5. It's a huge difference in these 3 years in age when you come to development and experience and knowledge. So, but I think this is a longer discussion. But I'm very happy to talk to you later. Is it okay?
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left down there.
Oh, no, sorry. I got the mic, man.
Thank you.
No,
sorry. Yeah.
My name is Håkan Thomson. I'm the president of the Swedish Association of Visually Impaired. And I'm totally blind since I was a very little child. And for me, this is very, very interesting and inspiring, because I missed that I was able to learn these things when I was a child, because it's always difficult to learn old dogs to sit. But my idea is that the real problem is just exactly this: how to interpret three dimensions into two, or opposite. When I was a child, I had no problem to understand how is a horse look like or how is a car look like, because I had seen three-dimensional cars and horse as toys, but this to present it in two dimension, it's much more complicated, and I think you have to start very early as possible, and try to figure this out. For me, it's rather easy to interpret maps from countries or how Europe is look like and such things. But when it comes to more complicated things, how a face look like and so on, it's very difficult to interpret it when it's written in two dimensions. So I think this is the key to solve this, is very early learn how to understand these two dimensions. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. But I don't. If you can read maps, you're already into how to read tactile pictures in a way. And when I started the project with tactile picture books many years ago, I had colleagues at the Swedish Library of Talking Books and Braille that were congenitally blind by definition, and they were beginners to read tactile pictures, and they were about between 55 and 60. And it comes out very quickly that they were not beginners any longer. So I couldn't use them as beginners, because they become very skilled in reading tactile pictures, even though they had no previous experience. So I think you can learn, but you need to have the, I would say, kind of keys how to read it.
Yeah. Last short question from Boguslav Marek.
Boguslav Bob Marek. I have this question about the relation between the ability to make drawings and the ability to interpret or read, understand drawings. Would you agree that with sighted people, the relation between being able to understand a drawing and making a drawing is very loose, not very close, but with the blind persons, maybe the ability to understand drawings and the ability to make drawings, the relation is much sort of closer?
You think so?
Well, I'm asking, I'm trying to find an answer.
No, you're asking. No, I don't think so. But okay. What you can see, because you can get, even if you have a kind of a scribble, you can see if they had some spatial understanding, and you can ask them to add details to the drawing, and they know where to do it, but maybe they don't know how to shape it, so to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Yvonne.
Thank you.